Simeon, whenever you're ready.
Okay. Everyone, Director of the Historic Districts Council, thank you all so very much for joining us on this balmy late spring day. For those of you who are not familiar, the Historic Districts Council is the citywide advocate for New York's historic neighborhoods. We work with over 500 neighborhood-based partners in all 5 boroughs to try to preserve, protect, and enhance the physical characteristics of New York City's historic neighborhoods and buildings. This is actually the culmination of one of our favorite events of the year, the Grassroots Preservation Awards. We are particularly thrilled to be able to take a moment and celebrate and honor all the people who, the groups and colleagues who do so much work and do the real groundwork that our advocacy is based on. Without these partners, preservation in New York would be nigh impossible, and the work of the Historic Districts Council would be that much more difficult. So thank you also very, very much for joining us. Previously, we had previous awards, and all of this is being recorded and will be available on our YouTube station. If you just go to YouTube and search for Historic Districts Council, or you could go to our website at hdc.org and look for links there. So tonight we have 2 very special awards. We have our Friend in High Places Awards, which is our annual award that awards one of our partners in government who really helps us and other advocates shepherd our efforts forward. And we also have a special award, the Mickey Murphy Award for Lifetime Achievement, and we are thrilled to be presenting that to Judy Stanton. So I'm going to be passing this over to Michelle Arbalou, who will introduce the speakers. Thank you very much. Oh, one last thing, please, we will be opening for questions after the presentations, but you can also please put your questions in the chat. It makes life a lot easier. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to share my screen now and get Judy's presentation up.
Thank you to Simeon, and thank you also to the HDC's board and staff for all you do every day to support New York City's historic districts. The HDC has been an essential partner for the Brooklyn Heights Historic District from its beginning. I'm personally very grateful to everybody there for honoring me with this award named after Mickey. I'll be devoting my presentation tonight to 2 reasonably short preservation dramas that occupied a few years in my very long tenure as the executive director for the Brooklyn Heights Historic District, for the Brooklyn Heights Association. As most preservationists know, the Brooklyn Heights Historic District was the first to be designated in 1965, but perhaps not everybody knows that in its 55-year history, our district has endured 2 demolition by neglect cases. I will be telling fairly short versions of 135 Dromm Street and 100 Clark Street in the hope of motivating like-minded preservationists to pursue similar cases in their own landmark neighborhoods. These stories matter to me personally because as the executive director of the Brooklyn Heights Association, I played a key role in the rescue process, and I still take pride in the BHA's central role in both situations. What I learned from them are 3 points. First, the New York City could and should do a lot more to strengthen the Landmarks Commission's demolition by neglect response by devoting greater resources at the LPC and Corporation Council. Second, persistent advocacy by an otherwise powerful neighborhood association is not enough to rescue a neglected landmark building. Third, buyers with preservation intentions may have to be found to complete these rescues. While it is true that in the early years of the Brooklyn Heights Historic District's designation, There were plenty of slightly run down 19th century houses within the district's boundaries. But it was also a spirited time of revival by proud owners who enthusiastically supported the designation. Building renovations proceeded steadily while real estate values rose. 135 Dromm Street remained an unfortunate exception to that trend. This prized gem of a wooden federal house built prior to 1833 slowly fell apart because its elderly owner, a reclusive former house painter, had lacked the means to keep it in self-condition. The house famously caught fire on Christmas Eve, 2004. I think we have a picture of the house. The electrical fire was concentrated in the basement. Neighbors phoned 911 and the NYFD arrived within minutes. Fortunately, the firemen contained it before it reached beyond the parlor floor. A bright green X was painted across the front boarded up windows, and the NYFD declared it unsafe to enter, effectively condemning it. Luckily, they stopped short of its outright demolition. Many months went by with the debris tossed out by the NYFD still piled on the front porch. For years, people called the BHA office with inquiries about the house, and a few people claimed to be interested in buying it. I kept a record of those who seemed real. Howard Hames was one of them. Hames is a general contractor experienced in old house restoration work, and he had recently renovated his own house on the block where I lived. Here was someone clearly qualified to undertake the house's restoration. Although the Landmarks Commission was notified of the fire, 8 months passed while this fragile house sat untouched. Luck played a role here. I happen to know a resident in the garden level apartment of the next door building. She let me into her backyard, accompanied by Otis Pearsall, who, as many of you know, led the whole effort along with his wife Nancy to secure the designation of Brooklyn Heights as a historic district. From the neighbors' windows, we could see and take photos of the back of 135 Dromm. The back roof and porch were near collapse. This was summer 2005. The BHA sent a strongly worded letter with photos to the LPC chair offering to arrange a site visit. I passed along my informal list of interested buyers to John Weiss, who was and still is Landmarks Commission's deputy counsel. More months passed when finally the LPC considered that the evidence of neglect was enough for the agency to threaten the owner, albeit very gently, with litigation if he did not fix the roof and restore the house to a state of good repair, which is a requirement by the New York City Administrative Code. Here was one of the rare instances when the commission has filed a lawsuit against an owner. Luckily, the legal story ends there because the LPC shared buyer interest with the owner. And after the owner met with Howard Hames, who showed him his own renovated home, he decided to sell the house to Mr. Hames. In the happiest of all endings, Howard Hames devoted the following full year to a total and meticulous restoration of this old house, ending in the summer of 2007. In 2008, the New York Landmarks Conservancy honored that work with a much coveted Lucy G. Moses Award. Howard Hames eventually sold 135 Dromm Street, and we are pleased to see that it is being lovingly kept up by its current owners. Moving right along to story number 2 is the case of 1 Monroe Place, also known as 100 Clark Street. I wish I could say that this next demolition by neglect case has had an equally satisfying conclusion, but it remains an unfinished saga. As viewed from the street, you would never know that this house was an elegant mid-19th century Italianate style building. Historic photos showed a grand brownstone crowned by a Second Empire style mansard roof. And over time, a succession of bad owners allowed it to deteriorate from underinvestment. My office at the BHA had compiled a lengthy record of reports and complaints to the Landmarks Commission, warning the agency about its deteriorating condition. In 2003, we notified the Landmarks Commission of the precarious condition of the front facade, believing that a demolition by neglect standard had been met. The City Buildings Department and the LPC made inspections of the exterior, but they took no action. In 2006, neighborhood hopes were raised when the Penson Group bought it, announcing plans to completely restore the building to its original condition. The BHA's Landmarks Committee reviewed and supported Penson's 2006 application to the LPC, which received unanimous approval at a commission hearing. Alas, the expected turnaround was not to be. The real estate market was tanking in 2007. Penson was unprepared for the tenants' buyout demands, and it had to declare bankruptcy. But the tenants stayed on. Here, I should mention that we knew that this house, oh, sorry about that, I'll stop while the clock's a little slow. Here, I should mention that we knew that this house had grandfathered floor area in the addition at the rear of the building along the Clark Street side, which made the existing building much more valuable to any buyer. That extra floor area was a key factor which would soon come into play. On Memorial Day weekend, 2008, somebody phoned 311 with an anonymous complaint about a bulging wall. The DOB and HPD, that's the Housing Preservation Department, responded with demolition equipment, evacuating the 3 remaining tenants on the spot. Luckily, a neighbor phoned me when the Russo wrecking crew arrived on Clark Street. I got there just at the moment when the crew was tearing the roof off. The Deputy Borough Commissioner from the Brooklyn office of the Buildings Department, whose name was Thomas Farrelly, was said to be in charge. But I was sure that the DOB had failed to notify Penson, who was still the building's owner, and I was equally sure that they had not consulted the Landmarks Commission. Otherwise, I would have known. Ludicrous as this sounds, I yelled at the crew to stop the demo long enough for me to make the necessary 2 phone calls. First to Mark Silberman, the Landmarks Commission's general counsel, who thank goodness was home in Park Slope and rushed over. And the other call was to the owner's architect, who managed to reach the owner, who was in Martinique. As soon as Mark Silberman arrived, he put a stop to the demolition. What followed was a bureaucratic nightmare lasting several more years, but there is no doubt that on that day, 100 Clark Street was saved with a phone call. Now, 100 Clark Street was and still is an eyesore for the neighbors, some of whom were happy to watch it coming down, and they still blame me for stopping the wrecking crew, even though all I really did was to make the right phone call. Fortunately, other neighbors accepted my explanation that stopping the demo was the right thing to do from an historic preservation perspective. I knew that the extra floor area would have been forfeited if the structure had been completely demolished, and that extra square footage made it more likely that someone would buy the house and pick up where the bankrupt Penson Group had left off. It's impossible to summarize the ensuing 13 years without putting everybody to sleep. Suffice to say that the Penson Group immediately sued the DOB and the Landmarks Commission before putting their building up for sale. Several years later, Newcastle Realty bought it, announcing the company's intent to carry out the full restoration envisioned by the 2006 Landmarks permit. Everyone cheered. But Newcastle's owner took much too long to get started, and that 2006 LPC permit expired. Newcastle hired a new architect in Tom Vandenbout, whose company, MVDA, is well known to the LPC for its restoration work in historic districts throughout the city. In 2016, 10 years later, The NBDA plans, which were following all the details of the previously approved permit, received the Landmarks Commission's approval. There were still more interruptions, which I won't go into here, but construction crews are at work now on the Monroe Place side. The building is still surrounded by scaffolding, and this case of 100 Clark Street remains a work in progress. But we have the realization of these elevations, and I'm taking the long view and saying that I and others remain hopeful that 1 Monroe Place, also known as 100 Clark Street, will be finished and worthy of nomination for a Lucy G. Moses Preservation Award next year. Again, there are some important takeaways from our experience. Persistent advocacy by an otherwise powerful neighborhood association is not enough to rescue a neglected building. This can take years. Buyers with preservation intentions have to be found to complete these rescues. But the city can and should do a lot more to strengthen the Landmarks Commission's demolition by neglect procedures by devoting greater resources to the LPC and to Corporation Council. These agencies are slow to bring delinquent building owners to court. The Landmarks Commission should be given authority to enter buildings to determine conditions, and they should impose timetables for curative actions, and they should and with rigorous follow-up and reporting of their results. And prompter litigation should take place when owners fail to act. It should go without saying that the Department of Buildings should not be allowed to begin demolition on a landmarked structure under the Landmark Commission's jurisdiction without consultation with the LPC. That concludes my presentation. In closing, though, since we have a picture of Mickey Murphy, I think, to put on the screen, I'd like to tell everyone who is still listening that Mickey Murphy was a dear old friend of mine. It was she who pulled me into the community board's land use committee to add another voice for the Brooklyn Heights Historic District. And this was years ago. Mickey died in 2002, but I'm still at it. Another thing to know about Mickey is that she was a lifelong river rat, which was our affectionate term for her because she devoted herself to the East River issues. She loved that river. And when you're watching the harbor, you'll frequently see one of the bright yellow checkered New York taxis, water taxis, with her name on it. Tom Fox, the original owner of the New York Water Taxi Service, named one of his ferry taxis after Mickey. That, as well as this HTC award, is a perfect tribute to Mickey Murphy. Thank you. Thank you, Simeon.
Thank you, Judy. What a great presentation. I think that it's wonderful that you're able to actually remind people of these things that a lot of people have forgotten. I remember when I remember them, but it's kind of shocking that it's been such a long time, and these have been ongoing
still not
issues.
finished.
Yeah.
But I think it's in good hands now. I mean, I don't think I'm being unrealistically optimistic. I mean, lucky things happen. The owner decided to hire Tom and stick with that 2006 permit. There, so much went on and changes to the administrative code, and that was why that excuses a lot of years of delay. But anyway, I think it'll be worthy of a Lucy G. Award. I plan to nominate it at least.
That's terrific. Didn't we do like a talk about this with Tom? I think Tom is in the audience. Didn't we do a talk about this like 2017? Wasn't that like 4 years ago? We're like, this is about to happen.
You may have, if I'm ashamed if I've forgotten that you did, but if Tom remembers, he should. I mean, this is in Tom's hands now.
I see Tom sort of shaking his head, being like,
I'm
yeah,
sure he is. But no one is better suited.
And Mickey was really great.
Yeah.
We're really Thank you very much. If anyone has any questions for Judy, please put them in the chat, or just got a lot of thank yous from Laura,
Okay.
and Lincoln Wrestler, and Liz Daly. So,
Am I allowed to do a little shout out on the political? No, yes, no?
well, you can, it's your award. You've got the dais.
Okay. Anybody who's listening should vote for Lincoln Wrestler as their first choice in the upcoming city council primary on starting early voting on June 12th.
Oh, I've got from Barbara Rogers, you've known numerous LPC chairs. Do you have a favorite?
Oh, do I have a favorite? Well, I love Beverly Muspat, although I was not active when Beverly was chair. I think Robert Tierney was a big help to us. He certainly, he did respond in the case of 135 Dromm, and Sarah Carroll, of course. How could we not admire Sarah Carroll? I'm trying to think I have to think back, who was it for 100 Clark Street? Who was the commission chair at the time?
That was Bob.
Still. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Bob was chair for a long time. And he was also chair during the downtown Brooklyn skyscraper district.
Yeah, okay, right, of course. But Meenakshi, well, no, the downtown Brooklyn, the Royal skyscraper, that was Meenakshi approved that.
Nope.
Otis, if Otis is listening, he would know.
No. I don't want to contradict you, but that was Bob. Meenakshi, because that was all under Bloomberg, and Meenakshi came in when Mayor de Blasio came in.
Okay, well, you know best, Simeon. Going back to Jennifer Rabb, if everybody remembers, I think this was maybe when was it, when the St. George fire occurred, and the building
99, I think,
on the Clark Street side, which I think it might have been 53 Clark Street, was key for the same zoning code reasons that it didn't burn all the way to the ground. Came into play with 100 Clark Street's demolition. Jennifer held more than one hearing. She didn't close the hearing record after the architecture firm who was hired by the owners of the St. George to rebuild it. She allowed more than one public hearing so that the Brooklyn Heights Association could testify on the revisions that were happening to the design for that rebuild. And I think it turned out pretty well. But anyway, I should give her credit for doing that.
Judy, this is Gail. I don't know how to chat, so I speak. What about I think it's 194 Columbia Heights.
It's 192. And hi, Peter. Peter won this award last year, guys. Everybody needs to know that. The question, the answer on 192, as best I know, Gail, is that John Weiss at the Landmarks Commission is still working on this one. The owner is not anxious to sell, as everybody can see if they go to the front and to the back. It's in terrible condition. What needs to happen, and this was one of the points that I made in the takeaway list, is that Landmarks Commission needs to get inside, and they need to do that. Ship with the Department of Buildings, if that's what it takes. The Department of Buildings, I believe, has the authority to force an owner to let them in. I mean, maybe, I don't know, Simeon, do you know this? Do they?
I believe they do.
We have to take somebody to court, but they have greater authority. But they could team up. And when I last communicated with John Weiss on this, he was trying to get the owner, whose name is Dr. Moore, to let him in. they've had several appointments and the appointments have been missed, and then the pandemic came, and time goes on and it still hasn't happened. But it's a huge worry. The people who used to live could not understand why this didn't reach the level of a demolition by neglect situation, which would, the opportunity for the city to take this guy to court. And maybe they will once they get inside. If they see the floor joists coming down, it's a masonry building, and it's in that respect. Of course, it's very different from 135 Dromm Street, but who knows what we're going to find inside.
Well, you can go in through one of the broken windows.
I don't know if they do that, Gail. It's a good idea.
That was a joke.
I mean, they've seen, I know, but I mean, it's not beneath me. You can go on the roof from next door, and the people who've lived next to previous owner next door at 194 has shown the Landmarks Commission to that roof, and the current owner of 194, I think, would be more than happy to assist the Landmarks Commission, but there's just only so much you can see until you go inside. It may not be safe. I'm sure it's a hard hat situation.
Yes.
But the question is, can they get in? And then when they do, we'll see. If it's not going to fall down, even though it's unsightly, I don't think the commission will take this guy to court yet.
Thank you.
That's what I know.
Judy?
Yes, ma'am.
I don't want to give Meenakshi credit for just about anything, but the two individual landmarks on Montague.
Oh, you're right. That's, yeah.
Place
Yeah,
under her tenure.
Yeah, that's what I'm mixing up. That's right. Shame on me for forgetting that. Getting old.
Thank
You're
you so
always
very
right,
much.
Simeon. I should have known.
It's fine. Thanks so much, Judy. That was terrific. And so we're gonna move along, move the action forward. But thank you. And I hope, and everyone, please stick around. We'll have more questions late. We'll have more time for questions later. But now I'm going to turn this back over to Michelle, who's going to bring up the film of Councilmember Dromm. Michelle.
Yep. So thank you so very much for taking the time to do this. We're so pleased that you accepted our invitation to become our friend in high places for our Grassroots Awards.
I'm so happy myself, believe me. Thank you very, very much.
And thank you for all your support over the years. Why don't you start by, this is just, a little conversation. We're gonna go on for maybe 15, 20 minutes. And I just thought I'd sort of jump into it. So you've represented Jackson Heights since 2009?
Well, I was elected in 2009 and started in 2010.
Okay, so that's fantastic. And that will mean that, you're the last of the ones who will be able to have represented Jackson Heights for over a decade.
Yes, and I actually, it was by no fault of my own, should I say, because I defeated an incumbent, Helen Sears, and I did not have to vote for the term limits extension, but I got the benefit of the extension because I came in the year in which it was put into effect. So that's why I get the 3 terms, and others behind me only get the 2 terms.
That's right. I remember all that, and I remember Councilmember Sears. So Jackson, can you talk about how your district has changed over the last 12 years?
Well, it's changed a lot. I mean, if you want to know the immigrant patterns of the United States, all you've got to do is come to Jackson Heights and you can literally see all the different groups of people that are moving in. You know, back when I first moved into Jackson Heights in the 1980s, you had the Indian and the Bangladeshi community coming in. Now we have the Pakistani community coming in. We have the Tibetans coming in, the Nepali, the Filipino, and you can really see the changes, because if you walk down 74th Street or 73rd Street, you have little India, little Bangladesh, little Pakistan, little Colombia, every little country of the world is represented in Jackson Heights. It's absolutely amazing. They say that over 167 different languages are spoken there. And, you know, it's a pleasure and a wonder. And I'm so grateful to have had the opportunity to represent it for the last 12 years. I think one of the most amazing things, though, has been our ability to preserve the historic district. We had a fire the first 6 weeks I was in office, building that was right on 37th Avenue and, you know, in the historic district. And it was a little suspicious, but the fire department didn't think so, but you never know with these things. And of course, they were limited in terms of what they could do in the revision of the rebuilding of the building. Mm-hmm. So we fought like heck, and we were able to get some contextual changes made to the reconstruction of the building. And although it was originally in a one-story building, it then became a six-story building. But it matched the neighborhood style and architecture much better than it was originally planned. And so I think we had a minor victory, not a major victory, but a decent victory there with that. And that was for 6 weeks into my tenure as council member.
And
so,
Jackson Heights has a very vibrant commercial strip. One, how is it doing in the commercial district? How is it doing with 2020 and 2021? Is it still? How are the businesses?
A number of the businesses are struggling, as is everyone during the pandemic, I think. But for the most part, they have survived, which is amazing. And most of them are immigrant-run businesses as well. So you might have a guy that runs Letty, the owner of Letty's, just a bakery on 37th Avenue, who learned his trade as a pastry chef in one of the famous hotels, and brought that trade to Jackson Heights, opened his store, and is doing an excellent job. We have another a young Pakistani guy and his wife who have opened Espresso 77 on 77th Street. And that business is doing quite well. They survived, fortunately. So there are examples of those who have struggled, but those businesses, for the most part, due to immigrant entrepreneurship, have been able to survive. And we're grateful for that. There's not too many vacancies on 37th Avenue.
That's great to hear. Now, I know that a lot of businesses sometimes are concerned about regulations and storefront regulations, but that's also something that Jackson Heights and the Jackson Heights civic groups have been very active in. How have you seen that effect? I mean, over the years, have people had problems with it? Are there local programs to help with that?
You're right to mention that we have a very active civic group, the Jackson Heights Beautification Group, which works very closely with me to enforce storefront regulations. And it's something that's important to me as well, because it was such a hard-fought battle to get the historic designation for Jackson Heights in 1992, I believe is when we first got it. So we work closely with a man that may be known to many people in the historic preservation community, Daniel Karatzis, who literally wrote the book on Jackson Heights. And we have written letters to numerous businesses when we see that there is a violation of the storefront signage issue. And for the most part, they've been cooperative. On occasion, we've had to go to landmarks preservation to get enforcement done, but they have come out and they have enforced it as well. You know, it's always better to educate before the actual start of signage that is not in compliance with the district, but sometimes we just can't avoid it and the sign goes up, but then we are quick to try to correct it. I just feel that that's so important for the community and for the preservation of the neighborhood. So we are quick to try to rectify those situations.
I was just on the phone this morning with somebody who was asking a question. I said, well, sir, I don't think that putting up a basketball hoop on your garage will be a problem, but better to call the Landmarks Commission first.
Absolutely. I mean, look, it even comes down to fences with the co-ops that are in the district, in the Jackson Heights was used to be a community without many fences. It was an open area where people could just walk in. But of course, now the need has changed, and over the years when you had higher rates of crimes in the past, etc., there was a need to erect fences. So that has become an issue in some of the buildings. And the landmark preservation has allowed, in some cases, smaller fences, maybe 2, 3, 4 feet high, rather than the higher fences, 6, 7, or 8 feet high. But I urge everyone, before they do any renovations to their buildings, to check the code. We've had some single-family homes where they put in those horrible, wretched chrome, railings on their stoop, and they spend money on it. And then we've had to go back and say to them, "You can't do this in the historic district. The chrome does not go with the traditional architecture." Folks should check it out before they do it, definitely.
And a not so hidden secret is there are so many Landmark staffers who actually lived in the Jackson Heights Historic District that it is well regulated, it is well monitored by that.
Yes, because we rely on that to inform us of violations, even down to the color of the brick being used in some of the buildings when they do pointing or whatever, or even the cement that's put in between the bricks has to match the original color. And that's important. We had one building where it looked like somebody grabbed a toothpaste and spread it across, but we were able to stop it and then get the landlord or the building owner actually to comply. Sometimes we see it more in the rent stabilized buildings than we actually do in the co-op owned buildings. But by the way, the co-opization of Jack and the mixture of the co-ops along with the rent stabilized apartments has been the key to success in the historic district. It's that mixture of housing options, I think, that leads to the Jackson Heights that we know today. And it's a very tolerant and diverse community, and there's a place for everybody to live in Jackson Heights.
When did those buildings start going co-op? I've always sort of known them as co-ops. Within the historic district, that is.
Many of them were originally co-ops. Some of them then converted to rent stabilized buildings. And then back in the 90s, or actually even before, probably in the mid 80s, they began to go back through the co-opization, I call it, of the buildings, and offered discounted rates for people who were living there at the time to be able to buy. And then they were converted back to co-ops. But some of the buildings that you're thinking about, the Queensboro buildings, for example, were the original idea for a co-op and garden community. So those were always co-ops. And they were the initial idea for co-op living in New York City, and maybe even in the United States. But there were other buildings that are in the historic district that went through that change, from rentals to co-ops and back and forth like that. But many of them now are fully co-op. Like in my building in the Berkeley, we have maybe 2 or 3, 4 rent stabilized apartments left because they've turned over. So, and by the way, the people who are buying the co-ops, very diverse communities. They are able to access home buying, and buying a home is the way to long-term wealth for their families. And so this is a way for them to be able to achieve the American dream, so to say, by the co-ops.
And also just the co-op situation also adds to the communal space. So much of the open space in Jackson Heights is privately owned but publicly shared.
Yes, I mean, Jackson Heights was rated by one of the parks associations as the district with the least amount of park space, except for one district in Manhattan which is actually across the street from Central Park. So effectively, we are the district with the least amount of park space. But you kind of make up for it by the garden apartments that you have, although they're private and they're accessible to the residents only of the building. You know, we do have a yearly garden tour presented by the Jackson Heights Beautification Group, where people can come around and view and see each other's gardens. So a challenge for me as the council member has been to be creative about how do we get more open space. And I think one of the things that I'm most proud of was the reconstruction of Travis Park. I closed down 78th Street between Northern Boulevard and 34th Avenue, and that extended that park, and bought a piece of land, by the way, from the neighboring garden school, which was up for sale, and we prevented development there by buying that playground. But it almost doubled the size of Travis Park.
Wow.
And right now we're going through the making permanent the 34th Avenue open street. And that area is just so beautiful. It's all tree lined. There's a beautiful grass and tree line median in the middle of 34th Avenue. And it really is such a beautiful area of the neighborhood. So we're looking to make that permanent.
It's funny that you should say that your district is not, that it's not well parked, because whenever I go to Jackson Heights, I'm always amazed by the street trees and the greenness of the streetscapes. So that ameliorates that.
Yeah, and that's something I've had to fight for, by the way. There's an ongoing argument between parks and Con Edison and other utilities about the placement of wires and other types of utility equipment beneath the tree pits along the sidewalks in Jackson Heights. And oftentimes I have not been able to get parks to plant a tree, even an existing tree pit or where there was formerly a tree, because Con Ed objects and says that the planted tree there would be too dangerous and the roots would hit the tree. Now, if there was a big old tree there before with big old roots,
Right.
why can't you plant a small new tree there in the same spot? So I would just warn the next council member to be aware of that, because that's an ongoing battle that hasn't really been settled yet. And we cannot have a deforested historic district in Jackson Heights.
No, it would ruin. It wouldn't ruin, but it would deeply affect it.
Yes.
And that sort of understanding of that sort of thing is why we're sad that you're going to be leaving us if term limits exist, because we live in a complex city, and these things it takes years to even begin to understand how all this interacts.
Right. I mean, you think you can put a request in to have a tree planted. You wait a year, they finally come out, and then they tell you, that they can't plant the tree, and then you got to fight with them for another year or two until you can actually get the tree planted. A big part of the job of the councilman is doing potholes and trees, but trees are so vital. And I'm a tree lover. I always say hug a tree. But it's so really important to our historic district. Just to the aesthetics of the district, that it's invaluable.
Can you talk a little about the extension that has been proposed and that the Landmarks Commission is dragging their feet on?
Yes, so we want to extend the district. It's not really a huge extension, but it's several of the most important buildings that we have in the district. Daniel Karatzis again has taken the lead on this, done the research on it, and we have asked the Landmarks Preservation Commission to include those. Now, it's unfortunate that in the beginning, when the district was first declared a historic district, they weren't included in it. But the politics of it at the time required that we move forward with what we had and had approved, rather than wait for the other buildings to come on board. But now it's time for the other buildings to come on board. And to be honest with you, it really just increases the value of the homes and the buildings, even though at times it can be difficult to get approval from Landmarks Preservation to do renovations or to reconstruct something. But ultimately, it really does preserve the value of the neighborhood and even the individual homes and buildings.
And I found just in my work, when you're dealing with co-op boards, the Landmarks Commission can be a very convenient sort of second force to convince the co-op board to make the effort of spending that investment that might be a little tough at that moment, but in the long run.
Absolutely. And, in my building right now, we're going through the issue of getting new windows for the building.
Oh.
So, that's a big one.
Oh, yeah.
Those windows have to match, the way that it originally was. And it does cost a little bit more. But to be honest with you, the value of my home I purchased, almost 20 years ago is more than quadrupled.
Mhm.
And, that's because the value of the district as a whole has gone up. And so, these are good investments to make in a community.
I can't agree more. Now, on the other hand, there have been some concerns being brought up as we sort of deal with economic inequities and social inequities of what the role of preservation is with regards to the city. And do you have any thoughts towards that? I'm not going to put you on the spot here and come up with a great thought piece, but
well, we can't give up preservation just to say that things are changing, right? The idea of preservation is to preserve for future generations. And the future generations that are coming into the district are the immigrant communities that have chosen to live in Jackson Heights, who also will benefit by home ownership, who also will benefit from the preservation of the district. So ultimately, my belief is that the more we preserve the district as it is now, the better the benefit will be to future generations. So yes, it may be somewhat inconvenient and may be a little bit difficult, but the diversity that we're seeing in Jackson Heights is also reflected in the people who are living in the historic district. And those folks appreciate, in my opinion, the historicalization of the district and why it's so important to maintain those standards. They like living in a good neighborhood. That's part of their dream. They enjoy spending time in Travis Park. They enjoy the architecture of the community. It's a small town in the big city. And that's what it is that we're trying to preserve.
I can't agree with you more. One of the things that we're very thankful for your support too is also there has been a renewed effort to try to celebrate places of cultural significance, like the Yonta House, which you've been a great supporter of. Thank you so much. And we actually have great hopes that the Landmarks Commission might actually save this house.
Didn't even know that the Yonta House was there until Maria Elena Giampino, the new board chair of Community Board 4, brought it to my attention. But what a house full of history that house is. The woman who lived there, Mrs. Yonta, I believe she was like 107 when she passed.
That's right, yes.
And that house just reeks of history. And it's those types of things that we want people to know about, and the role that she played in World War II, and the freeing of her people. And, there's just so much to be said for that. I was a former New York City school teacher for 25 years, and social studies was my specialty. If you're a teacher in that neighborhood, you can bring those kids to that house and say, do you know who she was and what she did and what she accomplished? And it's just a great way to get people to understand and appreciate the history of the community. But Elmhurst also has a tremendous amount of history, even dating back to the American Revolution. There's a lot of history there in Elmhurst. You have the Dutch Reformed Church, you have St. James Church, and the work that Maria Elena is doing is really vital also in the Elmhurst community. I love Elmhurst and I love Jackson Heights equally.
And actually, you're also very helpful speaking of places and sort of marking places. A number of years ago, this is, we had lost the Scrabble sign in Jackson Heights, and you were very helpful at getting that replaced. So thank you. I was working for Dr. Diamond King Spielvogel when she put that up in the first place. So, but what's interesting about that to me was that paired with a cultural medallion on the Community United Methodist Church, which is the birthplace of Scrabble, which is very, very important. But also, it was where the Queens, Gays, Lesbians United met.
Yes. So, that's another wonderful thing about Jackson Heights. And Dr. Spielstein, I'm going to get her name mixed up now.
Dynasty Spielvogel.
Dynasty Spielvogel. She's wonderful, and she was very helpful to me, even down to the exact color of the sign. And I don't think the DOT got it quite right, because there was a difference between this is a brown sign and it's not the original sign. But anyway, to me it's up, and it indicates that Scrabble was started in the Community Methodist Church. We don't know who took the sign. There was always a mystery about it, because John Sabini had put it up originally. A former city John Sabini had put it up originally, and it went missing. And so I felt it was really important that we mark these places for future generations to know and understand the history of the neighborhood. And so we did the Scrabble sign, the markers on the church itself, but I've also put up a whole bunch of other street signs in the neighborhood. Some of them for the LGBT community. When two young LGBT men were killed, one in 1990 named Julio Rivera, and the other one named Edgar Garcon. One is on 78th Street and 37th Avenue, and the other is on 77th Street and 37th Avenue, both killed in hate crimes against the LGBT community. For Guillermo Vasquez, who was an AIDS activist, that's on Broadway and 77th Street. And then just, other community people who have played a significant role in the community. And in addition, I don't know if everybody knows about our penguin that is on the corner of 37th Road and 75th Street. But as I get the story, former Parks Commissioner Henry Stern loved animals and animal statues, and he planted he placed the statue on a big rock in the median on 75th Street. And we call that penguin Wink, and that is our town mascot. And every holiday that comes, whether it be for the Gay Pride Parade, for the Colombian Soccer League games, for Thanksgiving, whatever it may be, there's a person in the neighborhood who comes down and dresses Wink up in some type of an outfit. It's either a pilgrim or a drag queen or whatever it may be. Wink is out there in all his splendor.
That is wonderful, and that's exactly what I think probably Commissioner Stern would have wanted to happen.
Yes, exactly.
It's so very important, I think, especially in the, I don't want to say far-flung, but, within the broader community of New York, to show representation of all kinds, just as people are walking around the streets. And so thank you for trying to broaden that representation. I know also that you were the founder of the Queen's Pride Parade, which is fantastic.
Yes. Yeah, I founded the Queen's Pride Parade in 1992, right after the murder of Julio Rivera in 1990, and also the community school board's opposition to the Children of the Rainbow curriculum, which was a curriculum that was designed to teach tolerance of all of New York's diverse communities. And 3 pages of that curriculum dealt with LGBTQ families, and it was optional. But I felt that my school board had distorted it, and they tried to define the LGBT community in a way that was, negative. And I said, what we have to do is to put a face on the tens of thousands of LGBTQ people who live in the borough. And our theme that first year was family, friends, and neighbors. And it's true. We are your family, your friends, your neighbors, your doctors, your lawyers, your teachers, and we're everywhere. And you know who we are. You may just not know that we're LGBTQ. And that Queen's Pride Parade now will be 29 years old, although it will go virtual this year. But it is very diverse, and it's welcome to the community by everybody. And it's a community-based parade, and people come down, they bring their children, and when the Colombian gay group marches by, all the Colombians cheer it on, and they have the Colombian flag out or whatever. And so it's a really lovely thing. I like to say about the Queen's Pride Parade that it has everything that we want: acceptance, diversity, tolerance, all different types of ethnicities. It really is exactly everything that we want.
That's so terrific. And how does it feel? I know you've been working to some degree with the New York LGBT Historic Sites Committee. So in fact, some of these things that you were involved with are now becoming sites of history.
Yes, and also, yes, we're working with the LGBT sites, historic district sites committee.
It's a terrible name. I mean, it's not a terrible name. They're lovely people, but it's a complicated name because of the granting.
And it gets confusing when you say all these different historical things.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they have been wonderful in marking places of historical significance to the LGBT community, like the Firehouse in Manhattan. It's a place that I went to in 1973, which was the original headquarters of the Gay Activist Alliance, which was a firehouse before it was that, you know? And another thing that we did recently, which we still have to work on, but we weren't able to actually post it, is one of our local taverns, Friends Tavern, is the oldest running LGBT tavern in the borough of Queens.
Oh, wow.
So we went to the Queens Historical Society, and they have approved a plaque to place on the outside of the building to commemorate the fact that this is the oldest running LGBT bar. So, you know, I like to make people aware of the history of the community because I believe that it just teaches people about the community and they come out of it with much more respect for the community. And that benefits the community in many ways.
It does. And it also, and it shows that we're all in the process of making new history.
Exactly. It's just so important for people to know and understand that. You know, when I was a teacher in Sunnyside, when my family came from Ireland, that's where they landed, in Sunnyside. And I wound up being a teacher in Sunnyside. And my family helped to build St. Raphael's Church. Wow. So I would take my kids down to St. Raphael's and tell them that my great-grandfather helped to build St. Raphael's. And then I would show them the house that he built on 37th Street. You know, it's still there. It's still lived in the house. But they were fascinated by that stuff. And I just thought it was teaching them to respect the neighborhood too. And who was there before and who's going to come after them. And you want to leave a place for people that's just as pleasant and nice to live in as when you live there as well.
That's so very true. Well, I've taken enough of your time. Thank you so much. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, I just want to say thank you. You know, I'm most grateful to be able to receive this award. I did not expect it, but I'm very happy about it. And historicalization of districts and my community is something that's very, very important to me. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Councilor. Take care.
Thank you.
And I believe we're actually joined by Councilmember Dromm. If he would like to say a few words, we would be thrilled to have him.
Well, thank you, Simeon, so much, and to everybody involved with the Historic District Council. And I did not, like I said, expect to get this award. Daniel Karatzis actually really honored me when he found out I was getting the award. He said he was going to make a donation. I see him online here, and that to me is one of the biggest honors because he is our Jackson Heights historian, and he fights so hard to make sure all the regulations are enforced, and he's always on my case about this and this and that, and I really appreciate his efforts. Without him, our district would not have become a historic district, and without the support of your organization as well, who I've relied on numerous occasions for advice and for help about enforcement, about additions to the district, strategies. It wouldn't have been done. And so I'm very grateful to receive this. And I don't know. Thank you, everybody. I really, really deeply appreciate it.
We're thrilled to have you. We're sorry that term limits exist because we're kind of girding ourselves to talk to the next crowd. Do you have any advice on how community members can best communicate to their elected officials about the things that they care about?
Sure. When I was younger, I didn't think that elected officials were accessible, and maybe some of them are not or hide away, but I try to be as accessible as possible. And elected officials do owe everybody in their district, a measure of support and accessibility So push your way in the door, get a hold of the chief of staff, demand a meeting, make your issues heard, get in people's faces if that's what you have to do. But you should speak up. And I think speaking up, particularly about making sure that historic sites, historic districts, working with the Landmarks Preservation is really, really, really important. I, in the video, said, the idea of it for me anyway, is to teach respect. When you know the history of a community, when you understand the history of the people who lived there before and the contributions that they made, I think that it teaches folks to have a lot more respect for the community. And so that's what I hope the outcome of our district is that people will respect that. And like I said, the diversity of the people who are buying co-ops now 4 or 5 times what I, for the price 4 or 5 times more than what I paid for it is just amazing. And it just keeps the neighborhood vibrant and desirable and a destination. I always said Jackson Heights is my destination. I wanted to live in Jackson Heights. I had to get to Jackson Heights. So it was a goal and I achieved it. And I have an apartment right across the street from Daniel Karatzis.
So in your retirement, you can start, advocating to him.
I'm sure we're both going to be noticing the same thing. The paper tied and glued to the light post. All of those things that are annoying quality of life things that we have to combat on a daily basis. Are things that I intend to continue. I was involved with the beautification group even before I got elected. And actually, I did a brief stint in Flushing in between 2 stints in Jackson Heights. And I would come back to Jackson Heights to work with the beautification group to clean the streets, get out a broom and sweep the streets. Because I think that, living by power of example is really important, and showing people that you're out there and cleaning the streets sends a clear message to people about respect for the community. And then at the same time helps the community. And my main objective, by the way, one of my main objectives, because I'm chair of the finance committee in the city council, is to make sure that we get our garbage collection situation straightened out. I was very opposed to any cuts in sanitation. And I have funded ACE, which is the community empowerment. I'm forgetting the first initial. But they have, homeless and formerly incarcerated folks who come out and sweep the streets. And without them, the neighborhood would be really horrible. It would be unbearable. And that's why we did the cleaning ourselves in the early 90s, because these organizations didn't exist. So I hope to go back to much better sanitation in the next budget cycle than we've had over this last year. It should never cut sanitation. It just signals disorder. I'm a big believer in that. So
I think you're very right. And I'm hearing from a lot of communities throughout the city of just a sort of a growing concern about it. When you walk down the street, now that we can all walk down, people are feeling more comfortable getting out again, and yet they see all the garbage and they're quite concerned.
Absolutely. It shouldn't happen, and it's not right, and it signals that nobody's in charge.
Questions for either of our honorees, please. You can put them in the chat. You can.
Simeon?
Yes.
I
Hey,
was going
Daniel.
to say, from looking at all of our little little tabs that, and you're talking about the new elected officials, is unfortunately myself included, and a lot of others have a lot of gray hair on our heads. And from what I've seen with our local people running for office, they're people who can't remember the 70s. So for those of us who remember New York in the 70s, that's one thing I've been leaning on my council member about, is because everybody's looking the other way. And unfortunately, a lot of our people running for office don't remember sort of the bad old days. And so what we need to do is make sure that, we communicate sort of standards and what our expectations are very clearly to them. I'll leave it at that.
That's very well put. Okay, well, thank you all very much for joining us, for spending an hour with us. on this beautiful spring day. Thank you for all your support of the Historic Districts Council. All of these presentations will be put online where we all seem to live, and we really hope to get together with everyone soon in person, in our churchyard at St. Mark's Church on the Bowery and other places. So thank you all very much and have a good evening.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.